Her sidearm followed, a Beretta 9mm that had been her constant companion for more years than she cared to count. The holster felt strange without its familiar weight, but she had operated without weapons before, in places where being caught armed meant torture and death. When she returned to her seat, the commandos were grinning like they had just won the lottery. Richards made a show of whispering something to Vega that set them both chuckling. Across the room, a couple of younger soldiers exchanged glances that clearly said she was about to get destroyed. But Rachel noticed something else. Something that Kane and his team had missed in their rush to savor their anticipated victory. Major Billings was watching her with an expression that suggested he knew more about her background than her personnel file indicated. And in the back corner of the room, a figure in dress greens was taking notes with the kind of attention that meant this exercise had just become much more significant than anyone realized. As Billings finished the briefing and dismissed everyone to the staging area, Rachel felt the familiar calm that always settled over her before violence became inevitable. These four men thought they had engineered her humiliation. What they had actually done was provide her with an opportunity to remind everyone why quiet professionals were the most dangerous people in any room. The lesson was going to hurt, but not for her. The staging area outside the warehouse buzzed with the kind of energy that preceded any military exercise. But today, there was an additional electric current running through the assembled personnel. Word had spread through Fort Wexler's gossip network with the speed and efficiency that only military bases could achieve. The Army advisor was going in unarmed against 4 Navy commandos. Rachel stood apart from the main group, checking her gear with methodical precision, despite having been stripped of her weapons. Her gloves, knee pads, and tactical vest remained, but the familiar weight of her rifle and sidearm was conspicuously absent. Around her, conversations died and restarted as personnel tried to process what they were about to witness. Kane, Daniels, Richards, and Vega moved through their pre-mission routine with the casual confidence of men who believed the outcome was already determined. They checked their simunition loads with exaggerated precision, adjusted their gear with unnecessary flourishes, and exchanged comments clearly designed to be overheard. "Remember," Kane said, his voice carrying across the staging area, "we're not trying to hurt her. Just demonstrate why weapons exist in the first place." Richards chuckled, slapping a fresh magazine into his rifle with unnecessary force. The metallic click echoed through the space like punctuation at the end of a sentence. "Shouldn't take long. 30 seconds, maybe 45 if she runs." Daniels rolled his shoulders, working out kinks that weren't there. Despite being the senior member of their team, he seemed content to let Kane orchestrate this particular show. "Just remember, she's still technically on our side. Keep it professional." Vega bounced on the balls of his feet, his nervous energy making him seem like a coiled spring, ready to unleash whatever aggressive enthusiasm his teammates directed. Think she'd try to hide or actually attempt something stupid like fighting back? The question hung in the air, and Rachel caught the undertone of genuine curiosity beneath the mockery. These men had spent their careers operating in environments where superior firepower and tactical coordination were the keys to victory. The concept of facing an unarmed opponent wasn't challenging. It was simply puzzling. From her position near the equipment racks, Rachel observed their dynamics with professional interest. Kane was clearly the alpha, the one who made decisions and expected immediate compliance. Daniel served as the tactical anchor, older and more experienced but willing to defer to Kane's leadership. Richards was the muscle, the one who solved problems through application of force. Vega was the wild card, eager to prove himself and possibly the most dangerous because of his unpredictability. In other circumstances, they would have been a formidable team. Their equipment was top tier, their training evident in every movement. Their confidence born from successful missions and positive performance evaluations. But confidence could become arrogance, and arrogance created blind spots. Try to keep up in there, Keen, Daniels called over his shoulder, his tone carrying the faint condescension of someone addressing a child. Wouldn't want you to get lost before the fun starts. Rachel knelt at the edge of the staging mat, adjusting her gloves with methodical precision. She didn't respond to the taunt, didn't even look up. Her attention was focused on details these four hadn't bothered to notice. The way the lighting would create blind spots in certain corners of the warehouse. How the temporary plywood walls would flex slightly under pressure, potentially creating opportunities that weren't obvious to casual observation. The fact that their gear made distinct sounds when they moved, radio static, the metallic clink of equipment, the whisper of fabric against fabric. Without weapons, she was theoretically at a massive disadvantage. But theory was just theory, and Rachel had learned long ago that real combat rarely followed theoretical parameters. Every piece of equipment these men carried was a potential tool in the right hands. Every moment of overconfidence was an opening. Every assumption about her helplessness was ammunition she could use against them above them. The observation deck was filling with spectators. Word had spread beyond the immediate participants, drawing personnel from across the base who wanted to witness what promised to be either a routine demonstration or a spectacular upset. The buzz of conversation created a background hum that spoke to the kind of anticipation usually reserved for sporting events. $5 says she doesn't last 30 seconds. Someone whispered from the crowd above. You're on. But I think she surprised them. Army doesn't send people to places like this unless they know what they're doing. 4 against 1, and she's got nothing. This is going to be ugly. Rachel caught fragments of the commentary, but didn't let it affect her mental preparation. She had been in rooms like this before, only the walls had been stone instead of plywood, and the consequences had been measured in body bags instead of bruised egos. The warehouse chosen for the exercise was a steel cathedral of echoes and shadows. Temporary plywood barriers had been erected inside to create a maze of corridors and blind corners, the kind of layout that punished hesitation and rewarded decisive action. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that shifted. With every movement, Major Billings positioned himself at the control station, his voice carrying over the loudspeaker with practiced authority. Team Alpha, stack at the entry point. Scenario begins on my whistle. Objective is the green crate in the center room. 3 minutes on the clock. The commandos formed their entry formation with textbook precision. Kane on point, his rifle up, and ready. Daniel second, covering the right side. Richards third, responsible for rear security. Vega bringing up the rear, his nervous energy finally finding a productive outlet. Rachel found herself positioned 5 paces behind their stack. Close enough to technically be part of the team, but far enough back to be an afterthought once they hit the door. It was exactly where she wanted to be. From the observation deck, she caught more fragments of whispered conversation. This feels wrong, man. 4 SEALs against 1 unarmed soldier? Kane's been waiting for something like this. He doesn't like sharing the spotlight. 79 seconds. She'd be lucky to last half that. Rachel settled into a balanced stance, her breathing slow and controlled. Her heart rate was steady, her mind clear and focused on the immediate tactical problem. She knew exactly how quickly dynamics could shift when violence became the only language anyone understood. The countdown began, Major Billings' voice cutting through the ambient noise of the warehouse like a blade. 3, 2, 1. The whistle shrieked through the space like a starting gun, sharp and final. The commandos surged forward in perfect synchronization, their movements coordinated through hundreds of hours of joint training and successful operations, or so they thought. Rachel didn't follow directly behind them. Instead, she angled off to her left, using the wall for cover while cutting toward the first choke point through a route they hadn't bothered to reconnoiter. Her movements were fluid and purposeful, drawing on tactical knowledge that had been earned in places where mistakes weren't corrected by instructors, but punished by death. The spectators on the observation deck leaned forward, sensing that whatever was about to happen wouldn't be the routine demonstration they had expected. "Where's she going?" "That's not the route they briefed." "She's flanking them. Holy shit, she's actually flanking her own team." The first corridor was barely wide enough for two people to move abreast, designed to simulate the kind of urban environment where modern conflicts were increasingly fought. Kane took point, his rifle up and ready, sweeping left and right with mechanical precision that spoke to countless hours of close-quarters training. Daniels stayed tight on his shoulder, their coordination seamless and professional. Richards maintained position just behind them, his attention divided between forward threats and rear security. Vega anchored the formation, already thinking about what they would say in the debrief about how easy it had been to neutralize an unarmed opponent. But Rachel wasn't where they expected her to be. While they advanced through the main corridor like a textbook assault team, she had used her knowledge of the warehouse layout to position herself in their blind spot, moving with the kind of tactical patience that came from operations where haste meant death. 20 seconds into the exercise, they reached the first turn, a sharp left into what the scenario designers called an urban alley. It was here that their confidence began to work against them. Vega swung around the corner without checking his six, his attention focused forward on potential threats and the objective beyond. It was the kind of tactical error that got people killed in real combat, but in training environments, it usually just meant a stern lecture from instructors about situational awareness. Today, it meant something entirely different. Rachel materialized behind him like smoke given form, her movements flowing with the kind of lethal grace that came from years of close quarters, training in places where hesitation meant death. She had closed the distance while they were focused on the corridor ahead, using their own tactical movement to mask her approach. Her left hand clamped over the barrel of his rifle, while her right found his wrist with the kind of precise pressure that came from intimate knowledge of human anatomy and joint manipulation. Not enough force to break bones, but more than enough to override his nervous system and control his entire arm. The rifle became a lever, her grip transforming it from a weapon into a tool for controlling his body position. A sharp twist against his shoulder joint sent lightning up his arm, followed by a quick pull that broke his balance and compromised his center of gravity. Vega went down hard onto the padded floor with a grunt of surprise and pain that echoed off the warehouse walls. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a strangled wheeze, and before he could recover, before he could even process what had happened, she had stripped the rifle from his grip with the clinical efficiency of someone who had done this before. Under significantly more dangerous circumstances. 32 seconds elapsed. Richards heard the commotion behind him and spun around, his eyes widening when he saw Rachel holding Vega's weapon. His training kicked in immediately, and he tried to bring his own rifle to bear, but she was already inside his guard, using the captured weapon like a lever to hook behind his knee. The technique was as old as hand-to-hand combat itself, but executed with a precision that spoke to years of practical application. A sharp sweep, and his legs were gone, his own momentum working against him as he crashed to the padded floor with a thud that resonated through the warehouse structure. She dropped her knee onto his sternum, just enough pressure to pin him without causing permanent damage, and used her free hand to apply a blood choke that cut off circulation to his brain. Richards tapped frantically against the mat, the universal signal of submission, officially removing him from the scenario. She released the hold immediately and shoved his rifle back toward him, already moving on without a word or backward glance. 45 seconds. Kane was beginning to understand that something had gone catastrophically wrong with his brilliant plan. The sounds of combat behind him weren't the brief scuffle he had expected, followed by their unarmed teammate calling for help or attempting to hide until the scenario ended. He wheeled toward the disturbance, trying to bring his weapon up in the narrow confines of the corridor they had chosen for their tactical approach. But the space that had been designed to favor coordinated assault teams now worked against him, his rifle becoming a liability instead of an asset in the close confines. Rachel stepped to her right, letting his momentum carry him forward while she moved off his line of attack. Her left foot hooked behind his ankle while her shoulder drove into his ribs, a combination that used his own aggressive advance against him. Kane went sideways into the padded wall with a bone-jarring impact that knocked the wind out of him and left him stunned for the crucial seconds she needed to complete the technique. The rifle slipped from his grasp as he struggled to maintain his balance. She caught it before it hit the ground, spun it into a control position, and had it aimed at his center mass before he could draw his next breath. The muzzle was close enough that he could see the simunition round chambered in the barrel, close enough that missing would have been impossible even for a novice shooter. Kane froze, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. His tactical mind was trying to process how an unarmed opponent had neutralized 3 members of his team in less than a minute. 62 seconds. That left Daniels, the most experienced member of their team, and the one most likely to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. The chief had heard enough of the chaos behind him to know that brute force was his only remaining option, that whatever was happening didn't fit any of the tactical scenarios they had rehearsed. He came around the corner fast and low, his arms spread wide for a tackling embrace that would have worked against most opponents. It was a desperation move, the kind of aggressive action that abandoned finesse in favor of overwhelming physical force. But Rachel wasn't most opponents. Instead of fighting against his momentum, she dropped her center of gravity and used his own force against him, redirecting his energy through techniques that had been refined in places where failure meant death. Her hands found purchase on his sleeve and forearm, and with a sharp pivot that drew on years of close-quarters combat training, she threw her hip across his line of attack. Physics took over from there, momentum and leverage combining in a way that sent Daniels airborne for a split second that probably felt like an eternity. He crashed onto his back with enough force to rattle his teeth and drive the breath from his lungs. Before he could recover, she had stripped his sidearm, racked the slide in one smooth motion that spoke to countless repetitions, and had it aimed at his chest from less than 3 feet away. The range was so close that the weapon's sights were irrelevant. At that distance, she could have put round center mass while blindfolded. 79 seconds. The whistle blew again, sharp and final, cutting through the warehouse like a blade. Silence fell over the space like a heavy blanket, broken only by the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the ragged breathing of 4 men who had just discovered the difference between confidence and competence. Rachel straightened slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. She handed the training pistol back to Daniel's grip first, a gesture that was both professional courtesy and subtle psychological warfare. Then she stepped away from what could only be described as carnage, though the only casualties were pride and assumptions. From the observation deck, a ripple of voices spread through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass. Some were muttering in disbelief, others chuckling in the way people do when they witness something that defies their understanding of how the world is supposed to work. Did that just happen? 4 guys, 4 of them. She took them all down in under 90 seconds with her bare hands. The younger recruits were pointing and whispering, their voices carrying fragments of awe and disbelief that would fuel base gossip for weeks to come. Kane struggled to his feet first, rubbing his shoulder where it made violent contact with the warehouse wall. His face was flushed. Whether from physical exertion or embarrassment was impossible to determine. The tactical leader who had orchestrated this demonstration was now trying to process how completely his plan had backfired. Vega remained on one knee, adjusting his gear like it might restore some measure of his dignity. The eager aggression that had characterized his pre-exercise behavior was notably absent, replaced by the shell-shocked expression of someone whose worldview had just been violently readjusted. Richards avoided eye contact with everyone, suddenly fascinated by his bootlaces and the intricate patterns of the warehouse floor. The muscle of the team, the one who solved problems through application of superior force, was now contemplating how easily that force had been turned against him. Daniels remained seated on the floor for several long seconds, as if standing up would make his defeat more real and permanent. When he finally rose, it was with the careful movements of someone whose body had just been reminded of its limitations. Rachel said nothing. She didn't gloat, didn't lecture, didn't even look particularly satisfied with the outcome. She simply walked to the gear rack, hung up the borrowed equipment with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the exercise, and removed her gloves. The timer above the entrance still glowed in accusatory red digits, marking the elapsed time. That would become legend by evening chow. 79 seconds. 1 minute and 19 seconds to completely dismantle 4 elite operators without breaking a sweat or losing her composure. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause could have been. It was the quiet of people trying to process an outcome that challenged everything they thought they understood about military hierarchy, physical capability, and the nature of true professional competence. The silence in the warehouse stretched like a taut wire, heavy with implications that no one quite knew how to address. Rachel's demonstration had lasted exactly 79 seconds, but the reverberations would echo through Fort Wexler for much longer than that. She stood near the equipment rack, methodically removing her tactical gloves as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Kane was the first to attempt damage control, his voice cutting through the quiet with forced casualness. "Lucky shots," he muttered, loud enough for the observation deck to hear. "Anyone can get cute when there's no real pressure involved." Daniels rose slowly from the warehouse floor, brushing dust from his uniform with movements that suggested his pride hurt more than his body. "Simunition changes everything," he added, his tone carrying the defensive edge of someone trying to rewrite history in real time. "Real combat doesn't have safety protocols." Richards busied himself with equipment checks that didn't need performing, his hands moving through familiar motions while his mind tried to process what had just happened. The rifle that had been stripped from his grasp felt heavier now, as if its weight had been fundamentally altered by the experience. Vega said nothing, but his nervous energy had transformed into something quieter and more contemplative. The eager aggression that had characterized his pre-exercise behavior was notably absent, replaced by the 1,000-yard stare of someone whose assumptions about the world had just been violently readjusted. From the observation deck, fragments of conversation drifted down like falling leaves. "Did you see that move where she used his own rifle against him? 79 seconds, man. 79 seconds to take down all 4 of them. That wasn't luck. That was training." "What kind of training?" Rachel continued her post-exercise routine with mechanical precision, checking her gear and preparing to move to whatever came next. But she could feel the weight of attention from above. The collective gaze of personnel trying to understand what they had witnessed thought Major Billings descended from the control booth, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes missing nothing. As the exercise coordinator, he would need to file a report that somehow explained how a routine training scenario had become something entirely different. Interesting adaptation to changing parameters, he said, his words chosen with the careful precision of someone navigating political minefields. I think we'll need to debrief this one thoroughly. Kane straightened, sensing an opportunity to regain some measure of control over the narrative. Sir, with respect, I think the scenario parameters were fundamentally flawed. An unarmed combatant in a breach and clear exercise doesn't simulate realistic conditions. The parameters, Billings replied with deadly quiet, were modified at your suggestion, Lieutenant. As I recall, you felt it would provide valuable training for adaptability under stress. The observation stung because it was accurate and undeniable. Kane had orchestrated his own humiliation with precise efficiency, and now he was trying to argue that the rules he had insisted upon were somehow unfair. That's different, he said, his voice carrying less conviction than before. We were trying to help with her professional development, show her what real combat looks like. Rachel turned slowly, her movement drawing every eye in the warehouse. When she spoke, her voice carried across the space with absolute clarity. I know exactly what real combat looks like, Lieutenant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Simple, direct, and carrying implications that made everyone present suddenly recalculate their assumptions about the quiet Army sergeant who had just dismantled 4 elite operators. Ma'am. Kane's response came out more like a question than a statement. Real combat, Rachel continued, her tone remaining conversational despite the tension filling the warehouse, doesn't usually involve 4 people surrounding one unarmed opponent in a controlled environment with medical support standing by. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. Real combat is what happens when the lights go out and the rules disappear. When the only thing between you and going home in a box is what you learned in places that don't exist on any official map. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, recognizing something in her voice that suggested this wasn't theoretical knowledge. Sergeant, we were just trying to... I know exactly what you were trying to do. Rachel interrupted, her voice still quiet, but carrying an edge that made everyone present suddenly pay very close attention. You were trying to humiliate me, but the quiet Army lady in her place proved that without weapons, I was just another helpless victim waiting for the big strong men to rescue her. The accuracy of her assessment was written across their faces. Kane's jaw tightened. Richards found something fascinating about his boots. Vega looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. The problem with your approach, she continued, is that you made assumptions based on incomplete information. You saw quiet and assumed weak. You saw cooperative and assumed pushover. You saw female and assumed inferior. Her voice remained level, professional, but each word landed like a physical blow. Those assumptions just cost you 79 seconds of credibility that you'll never get back. The warehouse had gone completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the base outside seemed muted, as if the entire facility was holding its breath. Kane's face cycled through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. Look, Sergeant, I don't know what kind of point you think you're making here, but the point, Rachel said, cutting him off with surgical precision, is that respect isn't something you get to withhold based on gender, branch of service, or how loud someone talks. It's something you earn through competence and professionalism, something you clearly need to work on. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Around the warehouse, personnel shifted uncomfortably as they watched 4 elite operators get dressed down by someone who had just proved her point in the most direct way possible. Major Billings cleared his throat, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond the bounds of a normal training exercise. I think we should... Actually, sir, Kane interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. I think we should run it again. Best 2 out of 3. See if she can repeat that performance when we know what to expect. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Rachel turned to face him fully, her expression revealing nothing while her mind calculated the implications of what he was proposing. "You want to run it again?" she asked, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than acceptance or refusal. "The damn right," Kane said, his confidence beginning to return as he found his footing in familiar territory. "Lightning doesn't strike twice. That was a fluke. I think everyone here knows it." Richards nodded, eager to salvage something from the wreckage of their reputation. "We weren't ready for unconventional tactics. Won't happen again." Vega bounced slightly on the balls of his feet, his nervous energy returning as the prospect of redemption presented itself. "Besides, now that we know what she's capable of, we can adjust our approach accordingly." Daniels remained quiet, but his expression suggested he was willing to go along with whatever his teammates decided. The chief had been around long enough to recognize, when pride was driving decisions that intelligence would normally prevent. Rachel considered the proposal with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Running the exercise again would give them an opportunity to prove that the first result was indeed a fluke. It would also give her a chance to demonstrate that it wasn't. "What are the parameters this time?" she asked. Kane's smile returned, predatory and confident. "Same as before. You go in unarmed, we maintain full equipment load. But this time, we adapt our tactics to account for your unconventional approach. And if I refuse, then everyone here will know that you got lucky once and didn't have the courage to prove it was anything more than that." The challenge was clear and public. Refusing would indeed suggest that her performance had been a fluke, that she wasn't confident in her ability to repeat it under adjusted conditions. Accepting would mean facing 4 operators who now understood they were dealing with a serious threat and would plan accordingly. Rachel looked around the warehouse, taking in the faces of the spectators on the observation deck, the uncomfortable expressions of the training personnel, the expectant smirks of the 4 commandos who thought they had found a way to salvage their pride. "One condition," she said finally. Kane raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly in a position to negotiate, Sergeant." "The condition is simple," Rachel continued, ignoring his comment. "When I win again, this stops. No more challenges, no more tests, no more attempts to prove that the first time was luck. We move on to actual training and professional cooperation." "And when you lose?" Richards asked, his tone suggesting the outcome was predetermined. "If I lose," Rachel said, her voice carrying absolute conviction, "I'll request immediate transfer off this base and recommend that the Army find someone more suitable for the position." The stakes had just escalated significantly. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was about her entire assignment at Fort Wexler, her professional reputation, and whether she would be allowed to do the job she had been sent here to perform. Kane exchanged glances with his teammates, seeing opportunity in what she had just proposed. Getting rid of the Army representative would solve their immediate problem and restore the status quo they preferred. "Deal," he said, extending his hand with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the advantages. Rachel shook at once, firm and brief. "Deal." Major Billings looked like he wanted to intervene, but the politics of the situation were delicate. Both parties had agreed to the terms publicly, and attempting to override their decision would raise questions about his authority and judgment that he wasn't prepared to answer. "Very well," he said finally. 15-minute reset period. Same scenario parameters, adjusted tactics authorized for Team Alpha. As personnel began clearing the warehouse for the second exercise, Rachel found herself alone near the equipment rack. She had just wagered her entire assignment on her ability to repeat a performance that everyone except her believed had been a fluke. The smart money would have been on backing down, accepting that she had made her point and moving on to normal training operations. But intelligence wasn't always the same thing as wisdom, and sometimes the only way to earn lasting respect was to prove that excellence wasn't accidental. She began her pre-exercise routine again, checking her gear with the same methodical precision she had shown before. At this time, she knew that 4 highly trained operators would be planning specifically for her unconventional approach. They would be ready for her speed, her technique, her ability to turn their own weapons against them. What they wouldn't be ready for was the depth of her experience, the breadth of her training, and the cold calculation that came from operations where failure meant more than professional embarrassment. The warehouse was about to become a classroom again. But this time, the lesson was going to be about the difference between tactical competence and true professional mastery. And class was about to begin. The 15-minute reset period felt like an hour. Word had spread through Fort Wexler with the efficiency that only military bases could achieve, and the observation deck was now packed beyond its intended capacity. Personnel from every branch of service represented on the base had found reasons to be in the vicinity of the warehouse, and the buzz of conversation created a background hum that spoke to the kind of anticipation usually reserved for championship sporting events. Rachel used the time to walk the perimeter of the staging area, her movements appearing casual but actually serving to calm her nervous system and focus her mind on the tactical problem ahead. She had just committed her entire assignment to repeating a performance that everyone except her believed had been lucky. The 4 commandos huddled in tactical conference near their equipment, their voices low but their body language suggesting intense discussion about lessons learned and adjustments required. Kane gestured frequently, his hands sketching formations and movements while the others nodded and asked questions. "This time we maintain visual contact at all times," she heard him saying. "No more splitting our attention between the objective and rear security. The objective is her until she's neutralized." Daniels pointed to areas on a hastily sketched diagram, overlapping fields of fire. "Keep her in the center. Force her to come to us instead of letting her pick us off individually." Richards cracked his knuckles, working tension from his hands. "Close quarters favors her technique. We maintain distance. Use our weapons reach. Advantage." Vega bounced nervously, his energy channeled into tactical planning instead of random motion. What if she tries the same flanking route? Do we leave someone behind to intercept? Their discussion was professional and thorough, drawing on collective experience from successful operations across multiple theaters. They were adapting their approach based on intelligence gathered from the first engagement, exactly what competent operators should do when facing an unexpected threat. The problem was that they were still operating from fundamentally flawed assumptions about what they were facing. Major Billings approached Rachel as she completed her circuit of the staging area. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could read the concern in his eyes. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this. We can call it a training evolution and move on to the next exercise." Rachel appreciated the offer, but she knew that backing down now would undermine everything she hoped to accomplish at Fort Wexler. "I appreciate that, sir, but some lessons need to be taught completely. And if you lose, then I'll honor the agreement and request transfer." She paused, studying his face. "But I won't lose." The confidence in her voice wasn't bravado or false optimism. It was the calm certainty of someone who understood exactly what they were capable of and had operated successfully in circumstances far more challenging than anything Fort Wexler could provide. Billings nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think they picked the wrong person to test. They'll figure that out soon enough." The major moved away, leaving Rachel alone with her thoughts and preparations. Around her, the energy of the base was shifting toward the warehouse like a tide. This had become more than a training exercise. It was now a test of competing philosophies about military competence, gender roles, and the nature of true professional expertise. The spectators on the observation deck represented every level of the base hierarchy, from junior enlisted personnel to senior officers who had found reasons to observe this particular training evolution. She caught glimpses of shoulder insignia that suggested people with significant influence over her future career were now watching to see whether her first performance had been skill or luck. No pressure at all. Kane broke away from his team's huddle and approached her with the swagger of someone who believed he had solved the tactical puzzle she represented. "Ready for round 2, Sergeant?" "Ready when you are, Lieutenant." "Good, because this time we know what we're dealing with. No more surprises, no more unconventional approaches. Just professional military tactics against whatever circus moves you've been practicing." The dismissal was deliberate and public, designed to plant doubt in the minds of observers about the legitimacy of her previous performance. Rachel recognized the psychological warfare for what it was and chose not to engage. "We'll see," she said simply. Major Billings took his position at the control station, his voice carrying over the loudspeaker with practiced authority. "Team Alpha, prepare for second iteration. Same parameters as previously established. Scenario begins on my whistle." The commandos formed their stack with even greater precision than before, their movements reflecting the tactical adjustments they had discussed during the reset period. Kane remained on point, but his positioning showed greater awareness of potential flanking routes. Daniels had adjusted his sector of responsibility to provide better coverage of their rear approaches. Richards and Vega had modified their spacing to create overlapping fields of fire that would make individual targeting more difficult. Rachel took her position behind their formation, exactly where she had been before. But this time, she could see the subtle changes in their posture that suggested they were ready for her unconventional approach. They expected her to attempt the same flanking maneuver, the same close quarters techniques that had worked so effectively in the first iteration. What they didn't expect was that she had no intention of repeating her previous performance. The countdown began again, Major Billings's voice cutting through the ambient noise of the warehouse like a blade. 3, 2, 1. The whistle shrieked through the space, sharp and final. The commandos surged forward with the same professional coordination they had shown before, but this time, their movement reflected hard-learned lessons about complacency and assumption. Rachel followed directly behind them, making no attempt to flank or separate from their formation. Her movement was so conventional, so exactly what they would have expected from a normal team member, that it didn't trigger any of the defensive measures they had planned. The first corridor proceeded exactly as their tactical manual would have predicted. Kane swept left and right with mechanical precision, his attention focused on potential threats ahead while maintaining awareness of his team's positioning. Daniel stayed tight on his shoulder, ready to respond to whatever developed. Richards and Vega maintained their modified spacing, creating the overlapping coverage they had planned. It was textbook perfect. Exactly what 4 elite operators should look like when functioning as a coordinated unit, which was why none of them noticed when Rachel simply walked away. While they advanced through the main corridor in perfect tactical formation, she had stepped sideways into a maintenance corridor that didn't appear on their hastily drawn diagrams. The warehouse layout was more complex than their briefing had indicated, with service passages and equipment access routes that provided alternatives to the main tactical route. By the time they reached the first major intersection, she was already in the objective room, standing next to the green crate that represented their mission goal. The realization hit them in stages, like dominoes falling in slow motion. Kane called for a sector clear and received no response from their rear security. Daniels turned to check their formation and found empty space where Rachel should have been. Richards and Vega exchanged confused glances as they processed the implications of what had just happened. Where the hell is she? Kane's voice echoed through the warehouse, professional composure cracking under the weight of tactical confusion. The answer came from the objective room, Rachel's voice carrying clearly through the temporary walls with calm professionalism. I'm here with the package. Mission complete. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noise from outside seemed muted, as if the entire base was holding its breath. Major Billings's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, carrying a tone that suggested he was having difficulty maintaining his own professional composure. Exercise terminated. Mission accomplished in 43 seconds. The number hit the warehouse like a physical blow. 43 seconds. Not even half the time her first performance had required, and she had accomplished the actual objective. While they were still trying to figure out where she had gone, from the observation deck, a ripple of voices spread through the crowd like wildfire. She wasn't even fighting them. She was doing the mission. 43 seconds. Jesus Christ. They were so focused on her they forgot why they were there. Kane stood in the corridor. His rifle raced toward threats that didn't exist. His tactical formation perfect for addressing problems that had never materialized. The expression on his face suggested he was having difficulty processing what had just occurred. Daniels lowered his weapon slowly, his weathered features reflecting the kind of professional embarrassment that came from being outmaneuvered so completely that you didn't even realize it was happening. Richards and Vega exchanged glances that clearly communicated their shared recognition that they had just been schooled by someone operating on a completely different level of tactical sophistication. Rachel emerged from the objective room with the same unhurried pace she had maintained throughout both exercises, carrying the green crate that represented mission success. She set it down in the designated extraction area and checked her watch with the casual precision of someone marking time for a routine training evolution. 43 seconds, she announced to no one in particular. New base record, I believe. The warehouse erupted in conversation as personnel on the observation deck tried to process what they had witnessed. This wasn't just tactical superiority. This was a complete redefinition of what the exercise had been designed to test. Kane finally found his voice, though it came out strained and defensive. That's not, you didn't fight us. You just avoided us entirely. Rachel looked at him with the patient expression of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. The mission was to secure the objective and extract within the time limit. Fighting you is never part of the requirements. But you were supposed to stop me from accomplishing the mission, she interrupted gently. Instead, you spent so much time preparing to fight me that you forgot to actually guard the objective. The truth of her statement was undeniable and devastating. They had become so focused on their personal conflict with her that they had completely lost sight of the tactical problem they were supposed to solve. Daniels cleared his throat, his voice carrying the grudging respect of a professional recognizing superior expertise. That was well played, Sergeant. Thank you, Chief. Kane wasn't ready to concede anything. This proves nothing. You avoided engagement instead of demonstrating combat capability. Rachel smiled, the expression carrying no warmth or humor. Lieutenant, in the first exercise, you wanted to see how I performed without weapons. I showed you. In the second exercise, you wanted to see if I could repeat that performance. Instead, I showed you something more important, which is that tactical superiority isn't about who can fight better. It's about who understands the mission better. You spent 43 seconds preparing for the wrong battle, while I spent the same time winning the right one. The lesson hit harder than any physical demonstration could have. Around the warehouse, personnel were nodding in recognition of a truth that transcended branch loyalties or gender politics. She had just provided a masterclass in tactical thinking that would be discussed in military classrooms for years to come. But the most important audience for her demonstration wasn't the crowd on the observation deck or the training personnel taking notes for their reports. It was the four men standing in front of her, trying to process the gap between their assumptions and reality. Kane's expression was cycling through anger, embarrassment, and something that might eventually become respect. Richards and Vega looked like they were reevaluating fundamental assumptions about military competence and tactical expertise. And Daniels was studying her with the calculating gaze of someone who was beginning to understand that Rachel Keene was not at all what she appeared to be. The lesson was complete. But the real education was just beginning. The slow clap started from somewhere in the back of the observation deck, deliberate and commanding in a way that made every conversation die mid-sentence. It echoed through the warehouse with measured precision, not mocking but demanding attention from everyone present. All eyes turned upward to identify the source. A tall figure in dress greens leaned against the railing, his silver eagles catching the fluorescent light. Colonel Marcus Abrams had the kind of presence that made grown men stand straighter without being told, and his appearance at what was supposed to be a routine training exercise sent ripples of recognition through the assembled personnel. Abrams descended the metal stairs with deliberate purpose, each step resonating through the warehouse structure like punctuation, marks in a sentence that everyone was waiting to hear completed. He was broad-shouldered and distinguished in the way that came from decades of command, with eyes that missed nothing and judged everything with surgical precision. The warehouse had gone absolutely silent. Even the ambient noise from outside seemed muted, as if the entire base was holding its breath for whatever was about to happen next. The colonel stopped a few feet from Rachel, studying her with an expression that might have been amusement. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the space with the kind of authority that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Didn't expect to see Falcon back on the training mats. The call sign hit the room like a physical blow. Kane's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he processed the implications. Daniels went absolutely still, his weathered features reflecting sudden understanding. Richards and Vega exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to realize they had made a significant miscalculation about who they had been testing. Falcon wasn't a nickname. You earned teaching basic training or shuffling papers in administrative assignments. That was a designation that came from places where failure meant body bags and success was measured in missions that never made the news. Operations that were classified so far above normal military classification that most people would never know they had happened. Rachel's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in her posture that suggested the arrival of someone who knew her actual background was both expected and welcome. "Been a while, sir," she replied, her tone carrying the comfortable familiarity of shared experience and mutual respect. Abrams nodded toward the four commandos who were still processing the implications of what they had just heard. "Gentlemen, you might be interested to know that Staff Sergeant Keene here served as primary close-quarters combat instructor for a joint NATO task force specialized in neutralizing multiple armed opponents in confined spaces." He paused, letting that information settle before continuing. "That was what, 8 years ago? 10? 10 years, Rachel corrected quietly, her voice carrying no particular emphasis, but somehow managing to suggest that the intervening decade had been filled with experiences that would have been relevant to their recent encounter. 10 years. Abrams repeated, his smile growing slightly. "Which means she was perfecting techniques like what you just experienced while some of you were still learning which end of the rifle to hold." The observation landed with surgical precision. Kane's face flushed as he calculated his own timeline and realized that 10 years ago, he had indeed been a junior enlisted man still mastering basic weapon safety procedures. Abrams took a step closer to Rachel, his voice carrying enough volume to reach every corner of the warehouse. In fact, Chief Daniels, I believe you may have unknowingly incorporated several of her original training protocols into your current curriculum. Daniels straightened as if he had been struck by lightning. His expression reflected the rapid mental calculation of someone trying to reconcile the quiet Army sergeant who had just dismantled his team with the legendary instructor whose techniques had been adopted throughout the special operations community. The Kosovo protocols? He asked, his voice carrying a note of awe that suggested he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his team's miscalculation. Among others, Abrams confirmed, along with the urban pacification methods that became standard doctrine for close-quarters operations in restricted environments. The transformation in the commando's posture was immediate and complete. Kane's arrogance evaporated like morning mist, replaced by the stunned expression of someone who had just discovered he had been challenging a legend. Vega suddenly found the floor fascinating, his nervous energy redirected into what appeared to be intense concentration on his bootlaces. Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he processed the implications of having been defeated by someone whose techniques were studied in advanced military academies. But it was Daniels whose reaction was most telling. The chief had spent enough time in the special operations community to understand exactly what Colonel Abrams was telling them. His expression reflected not just embarrassment, but the professional mortification that came from realizing he had failed to recognize a master practitioner in his own field. "Sir," Kane managed, his voice coming out strained and barely above a whisper. "We didn't know." Abrams fixed him with a stare that could have frozen boiling water. "Didn't know what, Lieutenant? That competence doesn't announce itself with fanfare? That the most dangerous people are often the ones who never feel the need to prove how dangerous they are?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Around the warehouse, personnel shifted uncomfortably as they watched 4 elite operators receive a lesson in professional humility from someone who clearly had the authority to make their discomfort permanent. That respect is earned through demonstration rather than demanded through intimidation. Abrams continued, his voice carrying the kind of disappointed authority that was somehow worse than open anger, or that assumptions about capability based on appearance or branch of service are the hallmark of unprofessional conduct. Each question landed like a physical blow. Kane looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Richards had developed a sudden fascination with his equipment that didn't require his complete attention. Vega appeared to be having a serious internal conversation about his career choices. Abrams turned back to Rachel, his expression warming slightly as he addressed someone he clearly regarded as a peer rather than a subordinate. "Good to have you, Sergeant. This base needs more instructors who can still demonstrate why their techniques work instead of just talking about theoretical applications." "Thank you, sir," she replied, her tone professional but carrying an edge that suggested she was done being underestimated by anyone. The colonel's attention returned to the 4 men, who were still trying to process the gap between their assumptions and reality. "As for you gentlemen, I think a lesson in professional courtesy is overdue. You'll clean every training mat in this facility, and you'll do it properly. This isn't just about tactical skills. It's about respect for your fellow warriors." The punishment wasn't severe by military standards, but everyone who had spent time in uniform understood the sting of being put on janitorial duty after getting shown up in front of an audience. More importantly, it was a public demonstration that their behavior had been noted and found wanting by someone with the authority to affect their future assignments. Daniels was the first to respond, his voice carrying the crisp professionalism of someone who understood that arguing would only make things worse. "Yes, sir." Kane managed a clipped acknowledgement that sounded like it was pulled from his throat with pliers. "Yes, sir." Richards and Vega nodded their understanding, both seeming to realize that they had gotten off relatively lightly considering the magnitude of their professional miscalculation. Abrams surveyed the assembled personnel one final time, his gaze taking in the crowd on the observation deck and the training staff who would be responsible for filing reports about this particular evolution. "Let me be clear for everyone present," he said, his voice carrying with the kind of authority that turned statements into policy. "Staff Sergeant Keene is here as a subject matter expert with more practical experience in close-quarters combat than most of you will accumulate in your entire careers. Her methods may be unconventional, but they are proven effective under conditions that make training exercises look like recreational activities." He paused, ensuring that his next words would be heard and remembered by everyone present. "Anyone who has questions about her competence or qualifications is welcome to discuss them with me personally. I'm sure we can find appropriate training, opportunities to address any lingering doubts about the effectiveness of her techniques." The offer was delivered with the kind of smile that suggested such discussions would be educational, but not necessarily enjoyable for the people requesting them. Abrams left as deliberately as he had arrived, his boots ringing against the concrete, in a rhythm that underlined the fact that the demonstration was over and normal operations would resume. But the implications of his intervention would resonate through Fort Wexler for much longer than his physical presence. Rachel collected her gear with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout both exercises, neither hurrying nor lingering. The validation of her background by someone of Abrams' stature was satisfying, but it wasn't why she had accepted the assignment at Fort Wexler. As she secured her empty holsters and prepared to move to whatever came next, she noticed that the atmosphere in the warehouse had fundamentally changed. The younger personnel on the observation deck were looking at her with something that hadn't been there before. Not just curiosity or professional interest, but genuine respect. Behind her, the sound of cleaning supplies being distributed echoed through the warehouse as the 4 commandos began their assigned punishment detail. The conversation was muted but audible, carrying fragments that suggested they were beginning to process the magnitude of their miscalculation. "Kosovo protocols," Daniels was saying, his voice carrying a note of professional awe. "We've been using her techniques for years without knowing where they came from." Kane's response was too quiet to make out clearly, but his tone suggested he was having a serious conversation with his assumptions about military competence and gender roles. Rachel didn't linger to eavesdrop on their debrief. She had made her point, demonstrated her capabilities, and earned the recognition that would allow her to do the job she had been sent to Fort Wexler to perform. The personal dynamics between her and the 4 commandos were now irrelevant to her professional objectives. But as she walked toward the exit, she caught one final fragment of conversation from the observation deck that suggested her demonstration had accomplished something beyond personal vindication. 43 seconds to complete the mission while they were still trying to figure out where she went. One instructor was explaining to another, "That's not just tactical proficiency. That's operational artistry." The evaluation was accurate and professionally satisfying. But more importantly, it suggested that her techniques would now be studied and analyzed by personnel who understood their value rather than dismissed by people who couldn't recognize competence when it dismantled them in less than 90 seconds. The walk back across the base took her through areas that had felt different just hours before. Personnel she passed offered respectful nods or casual greetings that suggested her status at Fort Wexler had fundamentally changed. The quiet army sergeant who had arrived that morning was gone, replaced by someone whose reputation would precede her into every future interaction. Her next assignment was in 30 minutes. She would be there on time, ready to work, same as always. But now she would be working with people who understood that challenging her assumptions was significantly less productive than learning from her experience. Some lessons took 79 seconds to teach. Others took a lifetime to learn. The smart money was on these 4 commandos, figuring out which category they had just experienced and adjusting their professional behavior accordingly. Fort Wexler continued its mission of turning good soldiers into better ones. The only difference was that 4 Navy commandos now understood that the most dangerous people were often the ones you would never suspect. And one quiet Army sergeant had reminded everyone that respect should be earned rather than demanded. In the end, that was probably worth more than any formal training exercise could have accomplished. 3 days after the warehouse incident, Fort Wexler had settled into a new rhythm. The story had spread through the military grapevine with the efficiency that only truly spectacular events could achieve, growing in detail and accuracy with each retelling. By the time it reached the mess halls and motor pools, the essential facts remained intact. The quiet Army sergeant had dismantled 4 Navy commandos in 79 seconds, then completed their mission objective in 40-3. Rachel arrived at the morning briefing to find the seating dynamics had subtly changed. Where before she had chosen her own position based on tactical considerations, now there was an empty chair in the front row that seemed to have been reserved through some unspoken consensus. Personnel nodded respectfully as she passed, their acknowledgments carrying the weight of genuine professional recognition rather than mere courtesy. The 4 commandos were already present, seated together, but noticeably quieter than they had been in previous sessions. Their gear was arranged with even greater precision than before, and their attention to the briefing material suggested a newfound appreciation for details they might previously have dismissed. Major Billings entered precisely on time, his expression suggesting that the previous day's reports had generated significant interest from higher headquarters. Good morning, everyone. Today's exercise will focus on coordinated multi-team operations in urban environments. He gestured to a detailed map displayed on the main screen. 3 separate objectives, 4 teams, overlapping areas of operation. Success requires communication, coordination, and adaptation to changing circumstances. Rachel studied the scenario parameters with professional interest. The complexity suggested this was designed to test leadership and decision-making under stress rather than basic tactical competence. The kind of exercise where individual heroics were less important than collective intelligence. Team assignments are posted on your tablets. Billings continued. Team leaders have 15 minutes to review objectives and develop initial plans. Before we move to the staging area, Rachel checked her assignment and wasn't surprised to find herself designated as Team Charlie leader, with a mixed group of personnel from different branches. What was surprising was the composition of her team. Kane, Daniels, Richards, and Vega. The assignment could have been coincidental, but military bureaucracy rarely produced coincidences this pointed. Someone had decided that the best way to resolve the interpersonal dynamics from the warehouse incident was to put them all on the same team and see what happened. She looked up to find 4 sets of eyes, watching her with expressions that ranged from curious to apprehensive. The swagger and casual arrogance that had characterized their previous interactions was notably absent, replaced by something that looked remarkably like professional respect mixed with uncertainty about how to proceed. Kane was the first to speak, his voice carrying none of the dismissive tone that had marked their previous encounters. "Sergeant, what are your initial thoughts on the objective?" The question was professionally appropriate and delivered, without any of the condescension that had characterized his earlier communication style. Rachel recognized it as an olive branch, an attempt to establish a working relationship based on competence rather than personality conflicts. "The timeline is tight," she replied, studying the mission parameters on her tablet. Multiple simultaneous objectives suggest we'll need to split into smaller elements while maintaining overall coordination. Daniels leaned forward, his weathered features reflecting genuine interest in her tactical assessment. How do you want to handle command and control? Standard radio protocols might not be sufficient for this level of complexity. The question demonstrated professional engagement rather than the defensive posturing that had characterized their previous interactions. Rachel found herself appreciating the chief's direct approach to problem solving. We'll need to establish clear decision-making authority for each element, she said, beginning to sketch out a preliminary plan. Primary and alternate communication methods and contingency protocols if we lose contact. Richards and Vega exchanged glances, their expressions suggesting they were still processing the transition from regarding her as an opponent to accepting her as their team leader. But their body language indicated willingness to follow her guidance rather than resistance to her authority. "Ma'am," Richards said, his tone carrying respectful formality, "what's your assessment of our capabilities versus the other teams?" The question acknowledged her leadership while seeking her professional judgment about their collective strengths and weaknesses. Rachel recognized it as another step toward establishing functional team dynamics. "We have good individual skills and solid equipment," she replied. "Our challenge will be coordination. We haven't worked together as a unit before, so we'll need to establish communication patterns and mutual support protocols quickly." Vega bounced slightly in his chair, his nervous energy channeled into tactical enthusiasm rather than aggressive posturing. "What about our approach to the urban environment? Standard room clearing procedures or something more unconventional?" The question carried a note of curiosity about whether she would employ the same tactical creativity that had characterized her warehouse performance. Rachel smiled slightly, recognizing his genuine interest in learning from her methods. "We'll use whatever approaches are most effective for accomplishing the mission," she said. "Sometimes that means textbook procedures. Sometimes it means adapting to circumstances that weren't covered in any manual." Kane nodded slowly, his expression suggesting he was beginning to understand the difference between tactical flexibility and random improvisation. "How do you want to structure our planning process? Standard 5-paragraph order or something more collaborative?" The question demonstrated his willingness to adapt his leadership style to her preferences rather than insisting on his own approaches. Rachel appreciated the professional maturity that his question suggested. "Let's start with everyone's assessment of their individual capabilities and preferred roles," she said. "Then we'll build a plan that maximizes our collective strengths while covering our individual weaknesses." The next 10 minutes revealed a different side of the four commandos than she had seen in their previous encounters. When focused on professional challenges rather than personal conflicts, they demonstrated the tactical competence and operational experience that had earned their elite reputations. Kane's assessment of urban navigation and breach procedures was thorough and realistic. Daniels brought years of small unit leadership experience and an intuitive understanding of timing and coordination. Richards offered expertise in weapons employment and close-quarters combat that complemented her own background. Vega contributed reconnaissance skills and an ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. By the time Major Billings called for movement to the staging area, Team Charlie had developed a preliminary plan that drew on everyone's capabilities, while maintaining clear command structure and communication protocols. "Not bad for a first planning session," Daniels observed as they gathered their gear. "Feels like we might actually function as a team instead of a collection of individual egos." Kane secured his equipment with practiced efficiency, his movements reflecting the kind of professional focus that had been absent during their previous encounters. Different dynamic when everyone's actually trying to succeed instead of trying to prove something. Rachel appreciated the observation. The competitive hostility that had poisoned their initial interactions had been replaced by something more productive. Professional collaboration focused on mission, accomplishment rather than personal vindication. The staging area was bustling with activity as 4 teams prepared for simultaneous deployment. Team Alpha consisted entirely of Marine Raiders, their coordination reflecting months of joint training. Team Bravo mixed Army Rangers with Air Force specialists, creating interesting tactical possibilities. Team Delta combined personnel from multiple branches with varying levels of experience, but it was Team Charlie that drew the most attention from observers and other participants. The combination of Rachel's newly revealed background with the 4 commandos who had challenged her created a dynamic that everyone wanted to witness. "Think they'll actually work together?" someone whispered from a nearby group. "Smart money says they either dominate the exercise or implode spectacularly," came the response. Rachel ignored the commentary, focusing instead on final equipment checks and last-minute coordination with her team members. The external expectations and gossip were irrelevant to the tactical problem they were about to face. Major Billings appeared at the central control station, his voice carrying over the assembled teams with practiced authority. "Exercise commences in 5 minutes. Remember, this is about coordination and adaptation. Individual heroics will not contribute to mission success." The reminder was clearly directed at personnel who might be tempted to use the exercise as an opportunity for personal glory rather than team accomplishment. Rachel caught Billings glancing in their direction, his expression suggesting he was curious about how their unlikely team composition would perform. "Final comes check," she directed, and her team members responded with the crisp professionalism of people who had decided to set aside personal conflicts in favor of operational effectiveness. Kane's voice came through clearly on the primary frequency. "Charlie 1, comes good." Daniels followed immediately. "Charlie 2, 5 by 5. Richards and Vega completed the check with responses that confirmed their communication equipment was functioning properly and their understanding of protocols was clear. "Charlie team ready," Rachel reported to the exercise controller, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had transformed potential disaster into tactical opportunity. The whistle signaled the beginning of the exercise, and 4 teams deployed simultaneously into the urban training complex. Team Charlie moved with careful coordination, their spacing and positioning reflecting the tactical discussions they had conducted during the planning phase. But within the first 60 seconds, it became clear that this exercise would test more than basic tactical competence. The scenario was evolving in real time, with exercise controllers introducing complications and changes that required immediate adaptation. "Charlie lead, this is control," came the radio transmission. "Be advised, Objective Bravo has been relocated. New coordinates follow." Rachel acknowledged the transmission while simultaneously processing the implications for their carefully planned approach. The objective change would require them to cross through another team's area of operation, potentially creating coordination challenges that hadn't been addressed in their initial planning. "Charlie 2, she transmitted to Daniels. "New route to Objective Bravo will take us through Team Alpha's sector. Coordinate passage with their leadership." "Roger that," came his immediate response, followed by professional communication with the Marine team that demonstrated exactly the kind of inter-service cooperation that exercises like this were designed to promote. Kane adjusted their formation to account for the route change, his tactical leadership flowing seamlessly with her overall command decisions. Richards and Vega modified their security positions without requiring specific direction, their adaptation suggesting they were beginning to function as a cohesive unit rather than a collection of individuals. The new objective location presented interesting tactical challenges. The target building was situated in a way that required careful coordination between reconnaissance, breach procedures, and security protocols. Exactly the kind of complex problem that separated competent teams from exceptional ones. Charlie 3 and 4. Rachel transmitted to Richards and Vega. Establish overwatch positions covering approaches from sectors 7 and 11. Maintain visual contact with primary assault element. Charlie 3, moving to position. Charlie 4, roger that. Their responses were immediate and professional, suggesting they had fully committed to the team dynamic rather than harboring lingering resentment about previous encounters. Kane positioned himself for the breach sequence while Daniels coordinated with the other teams to ensure their actions wouldn't interfere with simultaneous operations in adjacent areas. The level of coordination required was significantly higher than typical training exercises, demanding the kind of professional competence that couldn't be faked or improvised. Charlie lead. This is Charlie 2. Daniels transmitted. Team Alpha confirms clear passage through their sector. Window is 3 minutes starting now. Copy that. Charlie team, execute approach. What followed was a textbook demonstration of small unit tactics executed with precision and efficiency. Kane's breach procedures were flawless, creating entry opportunities without compromising the security of adjacent teams. Richards and Vega provided overwatch that prevented potential interference from exercise controllers attempting to complicate their mission. Daniels maintained communication and coordination that kept their actions integrated with the larger operational picture. But it was Rachel's leadership that transformed their individual competencies into collective success. Her decisions were quick and accurate, her communication clear and timely, her tactical instincts perfectly calibrated to the demands of the evolving scenario. Objective secured, Kane reported as they completed their assigned mission. Package retrieved, area cleared for extraction. Outstanding, Rachel replied. Charlie team, prepare for movement to extraction point. Maintain security protocols until exercise termination. The exercise concluded with Team Charlie having completed their objectives ahead of schedule, while providing assistance to 2 other teams that had encountered complications during their own missions. The level of inter-team cooperation they had demonstrated exceeded the exercise designers' expectations and set a standard that would influence future training evolutions. Major Billings approached their team during the post-exercise debrief, his expression reflecting genuine professional satisfaction. Team Charlie, that was exactly the kind of coordination and adaptation we were hoping to see. Individual comments will be provided separately, but collectively, you demonstrated outstanding tactical leadership and inter-service cooperation. Kane looked surprised by the positive evaluation, his expression suggesting he hadn't expected their hastily assembled team to perform at such a high level. Thank you, sir. We had good leadership. The acknowledgement was directed toward Rachel and delivered without any of the reluctance or qualification that might have characterized such recognition just days before. Daniels, Richards, and Vega nodded their agreement, their expressions reflecting genuine respect for her tactical decisions and leadership style. Sergeant Keene, Billings continued, I'll be recommending your team composition for future complex exercises. The dynamics you established might be worth replicating with other mixed branch formations. Rachel appreciated the recognition, but she was more satisfied by the professional growth she had witnessed in her team members. The transformation from hostile skepticism to functional cooperation had been more complete than she had expected when the exercise began. As they completed their equipment, turn in and prepared to move to individual debriefings, Kane approached her with an expression that suggested he had something important to communicate. Sergeant, he said, his voice carrying the kind of professional respect that couldn't be faked or forced. I owe you an apology. My behavior during our initial encounters was unprofessional and unworthy of the uniform. The acknowledgement was direct and complete, without qualification or excuse. Rachel recognized it as the kind of mature self-assessment that separated truly professional military personnel from those who confused rank with competence. Apology accepted, Lieutenant. More importantly, you demonstrated today that you can set aside personal conflicts in favor of mission accomplishment. That's what matters most. Daniel stepped forward, his weathered features reflecting the kind of hard-won wisdom that came from decades of military service. Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, it's been a privilege working with someone who understands the difference between tactical knowledge and tactical wisdom. Richards and Vega nodded their agreement, their expressions suggesting they had learned something valuable about professional competence and leadership during the day's exercises. The privilege was mutual, Rachel replied. You're all competent operators. Today proved that competence plus cooperation equals exceptional performance. As they separated to attend their individual debriefings, Rachel reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past few days. The hostile challenge that had characterized their initial encounter had evolved into professional respect and functional cooperation. The 4 commandos who had attempted to humiliate her had become teammates who understood her value and respected her expertise. But more importantly, they had all learned something about the nature of true professional competence. It wasn't about individual dominance or branch superiority. It was about collective effectiveness in service of mission accomplishment. The lessons of the warehouse incident had been absorbed and applied in ways that benefited everyone involved. Fort Wexler was fulfilling its mission of turning good soldiers into better ones, and the improvement was measured not just in tactical skills, but in professional maturity and inter-service cooperation. Some victories were measured in seconds of combat superiority. Others were measured in the long-term growth of professional relationships and mutual respect. Both types of victory were equally important to the military's overall mission. Effectiveness, and both types had been achieved through the simple process of allowing competence to speak for itself rather than demanding recognition through confrontation or politics. 2 weeks later, Fort Wexler had settled into a new equilibrium. The story of the warehouse incident had become part of base folklore, told and retold in mess halls and barracks with the kind of detail that separated true events from mere rumor. But more importantly, the professional relationships forged in that crucible had evolved into something sustainable and productive. Rachel arrived at the weekly inter-service coordination meeting to find the seating arrangement had become formalized. Her chair at the main planning table was positioned among the senior instructors and team leaders, a placement that reflected her acknowledged expertise rather than simple courtesy. The 4 commandos occupied adjacent positions, their presence suggesting they had requested assignment to operations. That would keep them working with her rather than seeking transfer to avoid potential embarrassment. Major Billings called the meeting to order with his characteristic precision. Today's agenda focuses on developing advanced tactical scenarios for next month's joint readiness evaluation. We need exercises that test adaptive leadership under complex, changing conditions. He gestured toward a detailed organizational chart displayed on the main screen. Higher Headquarters wants to see inter-service cooperation that goes beyond simple coordination. They want integrated operations where success depends on leveraging different branch specialties rather than just avoiding conflicts. Rachel studied the evaluation parameters with professional interest. The complexity suggested that someone at a significantly higher level had taken notice of the innovative approaches being developed at Fort Wexler, the kind of attention that could lead to expanded programs or enhanced resources, but also the kind of scrutiny that demanded consistent excellence. Sergeant Keene, Billings continued, your recent team performance has generated significant interest from the Joint Training Command. They're requesting that you develop a curriculum based on the tactical integration methods you demonstrated. The assignment was both recognition and challenge. Developing curriculum meant translating practical experience into teachable methodology, a process that required different skills than simply executing successful operations. "What's the time frame, sir?" she asked. "Initial framework in 30 days. Full curriculum development in 90. You'll have support staff and access to whatever resources you need." Kane leaned forward, his expression reflecting genuine interest, rather than the competitive hostility that had characterized their earlier interactions. "Will this be limited to close-quarters combat scenarios, or are you looking at broader tactical integration?" The question demonstrated his understanding that her expertise extended beyond the specific techniques she had displayed in the warehouse. It also suggested he was thinking about applications rather than simply trying to understand what had happened to his team. "The intent is broader integration," Billings replied. "Combat scenarios, logistics coordination, intelligence fusion, command and control. Unaware that inter-service cooperation can be improved through better understanding of different operational cultures." Daniels nodded thoughtfully, his weathered features reflecting the kind of professional consideration that came from years of successful operations. "That's ambitious. Most joint training focuses on avoiding conflicts rather than creating genuine synergy, which is exactly why they want innovative approaches," Billings said. "The old methods work for basic coordination, but modern operations require something more sophisticated." Rachel began sketching preliminary concepts while the discussion continued around her. The tactical challenges were significant, but not insurmountable. The greater challenge would be addressing the cultural and institutional barriers that prevented different branches from truly leveraging each other's capabilities. "The key will be scenario design," she said, looking up from her notes. "We need situations where branch-specific approaches aren't just different, but actually complementary, where success requires integration rather than just cooperation." Richards leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he was processing the implications of what she was proposing. "That means designing scenarios where no single branch has all the tools needed for success." "Exactly," Rachel replied. "And where the natural response to challenges requires consultation and adaptation rather than defaulting to familiar approaches." Vega bounced slightly in his chair, his nervous energy channeled into tactical enthusiasm. "Like urban operations, where Air Force intelligence capabilities have to integrate with Navy breach procedures and Army security protocols." "That's one example," Rachel confirmed. "But it could also involve logistics scenarios where Marine improvisation methods combine with Army supply chain management and Navy maintenance procedures." The discussion that followed revealed the depth of tactical knowledge and operational experience represented around the table. When focused on professional challenges rather than inter-service competition, the assembled personnel demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking that the curriculum would need to foster. Major Billings took notes throughout the discussion, his expression suggesting satisfaction with the collaborative approach that was emerging. This is exactly what higher headquarters wants to see. Professional expertise focused on mission effectiveness rather than institutional pride. As the meeting progressed through other agenda items, Rachel noticed that the four commandos had seamlessly integrated their contributions with the broader group discussion. Kane's questions were thoughtful and focused on operational effectiveness. Daniels provided historical context that helped frame current challenges. Richards offered practical insights based on recent training experiences. Vega contributed creative approaches that drew on his reconnaissance background. The transformation from hostile competitors to professional colleagues had been complete and genuine. More importantly, It had been achieved through demonstrated competence rather than imposed authority or political maneuvering. When the meeting concluded, Kane approached her with an expression that suggested he had something specific to discuss. "Sergeant, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" They stepped into an adjacent conference room, away from the general conversation that continued as personnel gathered their materials and prepared for their next assignments. "I wanted to talk to you about the curriculum development project," Kane said, his tone carrying the kind of professional seriousness that suggested this wasn't casual conversation. "My team would like to volunteer as test subjects for your initial scenarios." The offer was unexpected and significant. Volunteering to be test subjects meant accepting the likelihood of failure, frustration, and professional challenges that would be necessary to refine the training methods. "That's generous," Rachel replied. "But are you sure? Development testing usually involves a lot of failures before we identify what works." Kane smiled, the expression carrying none of the predatory confidence that had characterized his earlier interactions with her. "After what happened in the warehouse, I think we're all comfortable with being challenged in ways that expose our limitations. The difference is that now we understand it's about professional growth rather than personal competition." The insight demonstrated a level of self-awareness and professional maturity that suggested their transformation had been genuine rather than superficial. "I appreciate that. Having experienced operators willing to provide honest feedback will be essential for developing effective training methods." "There's something else," Kane continued. "Daniels, Richards, Vega, and I have been talking about our experience working as your team during the coordination exercise. We think there might be value in formalizing that arrangement for future operations." Rachel considered the implications of what he was proposing. A permanent mixed-branch team with her as the designated leader would provide opportunities for developing and testing tactical integration methods under real operational conditions. It would also represent a significant departure from traditional military organizational structures. "That would depend on approval from multiple command structures," she said. "Inter-service personnel assignments aren't simple to arrange." "We understand that," Kane replied. "But we think the results we achieved during that one exercise demonstrate enough potential to justify the administrative complexity." The suggestion was professionally sound and personally satisfying. Working with the same team members over extended periods would allow them to develop the kind of tactical integration that couldn't be achieved through occasional joint exercises. "I'll discuss it with Major Billings," Rachel said. "If there's institutional support for the concept, it could provide excellent data for curriculum development." As they rejoined the group in the main conference room, Rachel reflected on the complete transformation that had occurred in her professional relationships at Fort Wexler. The hostile skepticism that had greeted her arrival had been replaced by genuine respect and collaborative enthusiasm. More importantly, the change had been achieved through demonstrated competence rather than political maneuvering or institutional pressure. Daniels approached as she gathered her materials, his expression reflecting the kind of professional satisfaction that came from successful mission accomplishment. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to work on your team during the coordination exercise. It was the most effective inter-service operation I've participated in during my entire career." Richards and Vega nodded their agreement, their expressions suggesting they shared Daniels' assessment of their collective performance. The effectiveness came from everyone's willingness to adapt their individual strengths to collective objectives. Rachel replied, "That's not always easy to achieve, especially with personnel who haven't worked together before." "That's exactly why we think the permanent team concept has merit," Vega said, his nervous energy channeled into professional enthusiasm. "The tactical integration we achieved in one exercise could be developed into something even more effective with time and repetition." The conversation was interrupted by Major Billings, who approached with an expression that suggested he had information that would affect their planning discussions. "Sergeant Keene," he said, "I just received word from Joint Training Command. They want to observe your curriculum development process firsthand. We'll be hosting a delegation of senior officers next month to evaluate the methods you're developing." The announcement added both opportunity and pressure to the project. High-level observation could lead to expanded resources and broader implementation of successful methods. It could also mean intense scrutiny and potential criticism if the approaches didn't meet expectations. "Any specific areas of focus they want to see demonstrated?" Rachel asked. "They're particularly interested in tactical scenarios that require adaptive leadership under changing conditions," Billings replied. "The kind of challenges where success depends on quick decision-making and effective resource utilization, rather than following predetermined procedures." Kane exchanged glances with his teammates, their expressions suggesting they were thinking about the same thing. "That sounds like exactly the kind of scenarios our volunteer test team could help develop and demonstrate." "If the administrative arrangements can be made," Rachel said, "having experienced operators willing to test complex scenarios would definitely improve the quality of what we can present to the delegation." Billings nodded thoughtfully, his expression suggesting he was already considering the practical steps necessary to formalize the arrangements they were discussing. "I'll start working on the personnel assignment request today. Having concrete examples of successful inter-service integration would definitely strengthen our presentation to the visiting delegation." As the meeting participants dispersed to their various assignments, Rachel found herself looking forward to the challenges ahead with genuine enthusiasm rather than professional obligation. The curriculum development project would allow her to translate practical experience into teachable methodology, while the permanent team concept would provide opportunities to develop tactical integration methods under real operational conditions. But most importantly, she would be working with colleagues who had demonstrated their willingness to set aside institutional prejudices in favor of professional excellence. The hostile competitors who had challenged her in the warehouse had become trusted teammates committed to collective success rather than individual glory. Some victories were achieved through superior tactics and overwhelming force. Others were won through patience, demonstrated competence, and the gradual transformation of adversaries into allies. Both types of victory were essential to military effectiveness, but the second type often proved more durable and far-reaching in its impact. Fort Wexler was fulfilling its mission of turning good soldiers into better ones. And the improvement was measured not just in individual tactical skills, but in the collective ability to achieve mission success through genuine inter-service cooperation. The lessons learned in 79 seconds of warehouse combat had evolved into something much more significant. A sustainable model for professional excellence that transcended branch loyalties and individual egos in service of military effectiveness. 3 months later, the delegation from Joint Training Command arrived at Fort Wexler in a convoy of official vehicles that suggested the kind of high-level attention usually reserved for major policy initiatives. Rachel watched their arrival from the observation deck of the main training facility, her curriculum development project about to face its most significant test. The visitors represented every branch of the military and several allied nations, their collective rank and experience creating the kind of audience that could either validate her methods or end her career at Fort Wexler. Colonel Abrams had returned specifically for the demonstration, his presence adding both support and additional pressure to an already complex situation. Below her, the permanent inter-service team she had been developing moved through their pre-demonstration routine with the kind of professional confidence that came from months of intensive training together. Kane, Daniels, Richards, and Vega had evolved from hostile competitors into a cohesive unit that functioned with the kind of tactical integration that military theorists discussed but rarely achieved in practice. "Nervous?" Major Billings asked, joining her at the observation window. "Focused," Rachel replied, though she appreciated his check on her mental state. "We've tested everything extensively. The methods work. The question is whether they work well enough to justify the institutional changes the delegation is considering," Billings observed. "Restructuring inter-service training protocols is a significant decision with budgetary and political implications." Rachel understood the broader context of what they were about to demonstrate. Success could lead to expanded programs and enhanced resources for innovative training methods. Failure could result in a return to traditional approaches that prioritized institutional separation over tactical integration. The demonstration scenario was designed to test every aspect of the curriculum she had developed over the previous months. Multiple simultaneous objectives, changing parameters, complex coordination requirements, and adaptive leadership challenges that would push her team beyond anything they had previously attempted. "Team Charlie, report to staging area," came the announcement over the facility's communication system. As she descended to the staging area, Rachel noticed that the energy among the assembled personnel was different from typical training exercises. The presence of high-ranking observers had created an atmosphere of anticipation that extended beyond simple professional curiosity. Everyone understood that what happened over the next 2 hours could influence military training methods for years to come. Her team was already conducting final equipment checks with the kind of methodical precision that had become their trademark. But their interaction patterns reflected the deep professional relationships that had developed through months of working together under increasingly complex conditions. Kane's leadership style had evolved to complement her command decisions rather than competing with them. Daniels provided tactical wisdom and historical perspective that enhanced their collective decision-making. Richards had learned to apply his technical expertise in ways that supported team objectives rather than individual achievement. Vega had channeled his creative energy into reconnaissance and adaptation methods that gave their team tactical advantages that couldn't be replicated through standard procedures. "Final briefing," Rachel announced, gathering her team around the tactical display that showed their assigned objectives and operational parameters. But before she could begin her review of the mission elements, Kane raised his hand with an expression that suggested he had something important to communicate. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the kind of professional formality that preceded significant announcements. "On behalf of the team, I want to say that working with you over these past months has been the most professionally rewarding experience of our military careers." Daniels nodded his agreement, his weathered features reflecting genuine satisfaction. "We've learned more about tactical integration and adaptive leadership than we thought possible. More importantly, we've learned that excellence comes from collective competence rather than individual dominance." Richards and Vega murmured their agreement, their expressions suggesting they shared their teammates' assessment of their professional development under her leadership. "The learning has been mutual," Rachel replied, genuinely moved by their acknowledgement. "You've demonstrated that professional growth is possible regardless of starting point, as long as people are willing to set aside preconceptions in favor of mission effectiveness." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Abrams and several members of the visiting delegation, their presence adding gravity to what was about to unfold. "Sergeant Keene," Abrams said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone present stand slightly straighter. "The delegation is eager to see practical demonstration of the tactical integration methods you've developed." Behind him, a Canadian brigadier general and a British colonel nodded their acknowledgement. their expressions suggesting professional curiosity about approaches that might be applicable to their own forces. "Team Charlie is ready, sir," Rachel replied, her tone carrying the confidence that came from extensive preparation and proven methods. The demonstration scenario began with a complexity that immediately challenged traditional approaches to inter-service cooperation. Multiple objectives scattered across a simulated urban environment, changing tactical parameters introduced in real time, and coordination requirements that demanded the kind of adaptive leadership that couldn't be taught through standard military procedures. But Team Charlie moved through the evolving challenges with the kind of fluid efficiency that suggested they were operating on a completely different level than typical joint training exercises. Kane's breach procedures flowed seamlessly with Daniels's timing and coordination. Richards's technical expertise was perfectly integrated with Vega's reconnaissance capabilities. Rachel's leadership decisions drew on everyone's strengths while compensating for individual limitations. Most importantly, their tactical integration extended beyond simple coordination to genuine synergy. Each team member's contributions enhanced the effectiveness of everyone else's capabilities, creating collective performance that exceeded the sum of their individual competencies. Outstanding adaptation to changing parameters. Observed the Canadian Brigadier General as Team Charlie successfully completed their third objective modification without requiring additional planning time. The level of tactical integration is remarkable, added the British Colonel. Their decision-making process appears to be genuinely collective rather than hierarchical. From the observation deck, fragments of professional commentary drifted down as military experts tried to analyze what they were witnessing. Look at how they're using different branch capabilities as complementary tools rather than competing approaches. The leadership rotation is seamless. Each person takes point based on situational requirements rather than predetermined assignments. They're not just cooperating. They're genuinely integrated. The scenario concluded with Team Charlie having accomplished all assigned objectives while providing tactical support to two simulated allied units that had encountered complications during their own missions. The level of performance they demonstrated exceeded the exercise designer's most optimistic projections and set standards that would influence joint training protocols for years to come. Colonel Abrams descended from the observation deck, his expression reflecting the kind of professional satisfaction that came from witnessing exceptional military competence. Team Charlie, that was exactly the kind of tactical integration that modern military operations require. Individual comments will be provided separately, but collectively, you've demonstrated that inter-service cooperation can evolve into genuine tactical synergy. The visiting delegation approached with expressions that suggested they had witnessed something significant, enough to justify the institutional changes they were considering. Sergeant Keane, the Canadian Brigadier General, said, "We'd like to discuss implementing similar training methods within our own force structure. The tactical integration your team demonstrated has applications that extend far beyond basic joint operations." The British Colonel nodded his agreement. "We're particularly interested in the leadership development aspects of your curriculum. The way your team members adapted their individual roles to collective requirements suggests training methods that could benefit our own inter-service coordination programs." Rachel appreciated the recognition, but she was more satisfied by the professional transformation she had witnessed in her team members over the previous months. The methods are replicable, but they require institutional commitment to genuine integration rather than simple coordination. "That's exactly what we're prepared to provide," the Brigadier General replied. "Modern military challenges require the kind of adaptive capability your team has demonstrated. We're ready to make the institutional changes necessary to develop similar capabilities within our own forces." As the delegation moved to conduct individual interviews and review detailed curriculum materials, Rachel found herself reflecting on the complete transformation that had occurred since her arrival at Fort Wexler. The hostile skepticism that had greeted her initial assignment had evolved into professional respect and institutional support for innovative training methods. The four commandos who had attempted to humiliate her in the warehouse had become the core of a team that demonstrated the highest levels of tactical integration and adaptive leadership. But most importantly, the lessons learned through their professional development had been translated into teachable methodology that could benefit military personnel far beyond Fort Wexler. Kane approached as she completed her post-exercise equipment check, his expression reflecting the kind of professional satisfaction that came from exceptional mission accomplishment. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted you to know that our team has requested permanent assignment to your advanced training program. Whatever institutional changes result from today's demonstration, we want to be part of developing and testing the next generation of tactical integration methods." Daniels, Richards, and Vega nodded their agreement, their expressions suggesting they had all reached the same conclusion about their professional priorities. That means continuing to serve as test subjects for experimental training scenarios, Rachel reminded them, including methods that will probably fail before we identify what works. After what we've learned about the difference between individual competence and collective excellence, Daniels replied, "We can't imagine wanting to return to traditional approaches that prioritize institutional separation over mission effectiveness." The commitment they were expressing represented more than professional preference. It was a recognition that their experience had fundamentally changed their understanding of military competence and tactical effectiveness. As the afternoon concluded, with final briefings and administrative discussions, Rachel received word that her curriculum development project had been approved for expansion and implementation across multiple bases and allied forces. The method she had developed would now be tested and refined on a scale that could influence military training doctrine for years to come. But the most satisfying outcome wasn't institutional recognition or career advancement. It was the knowledge that four military professionals had discovered capabilities they didn't know they possessed, and that their transformation demonstrated the possibility of genuine excellence through collective effort rather than individual dominance. The lessons that had begun with 79 seconds of warehouse combat had evolved into something much more significant. A sustainable model for military excellence that transcended branch loyalties and individual egos in service of mission effectiveness. Fort Wexler continued its mission of turning good soldiers into better ones, but now that mission included developing training methods that could benefit military personnel around the world. The quiet army sergeant who had dismantled four commandos with her bare hands had become an architect of institutional change that would outlast any individual assignment or career. Some victories were measured in seconds of tactical superiority. Others were measured in decades of institutional improvement and professional development. Both types of victory were essential to military effectiveness, but the second type created legacies that extended far beyond any individual achievement. The warehouse incident had lasted 79 seconds. Its impact would continue for generations of military professionals who would benefit from training methods that emphasize collective excellence over individual competition, tactical integration over institutional separation, and mission effectiveness over personal glory. In the end, that was probably the most important lesson of all. That true professional competence wasn't about proving superiority over others, but about elevating everyone's capability to achieve mission success through genuine cooperation and mutual respect. The four commandos who had once surrounded her with weapons ready had learned that lesson the hard way. But they had learned it completely, and their transformation had become the foundation for training methods that would help countless other military professionals discover their own capacity for excellence through collective effort. That was a Legacy worth 79 seconds of anyone's time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Have you ever witnessed someone get completely underestimated like Rachel? Sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones you should never challenge. Share your own stories of when assumptions backfired spectacularly, or tell us about a time when you saw true professionalism triumph over arrogance. What did you think about how those four commandos transformed from antagonists into loyal teammates? It just goes to show that respect earned through competence lasts so much longer than respect demanded through intimidation. If this story of quiet strength and professional excellence resonated with you, make sure to check out our other incredible tales of everyday heroes who prove that true power doesn't need to announce itself. Click that notification bell so you never miss when we drop new stories about people who let their actions speak louder than their words. Until next time, remember that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones who never have to prove how dangerous they are. Thanks for being part of our community.